thing that consistency and politics, well, they just might be mutually exclusive. That does it for today. We will be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report with John Dickerson starts right now.
Welcome to the Daily Report for August 26, 2024. I'm John Dickerson. Inflammation over the weekend in the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah appears to have cooled. But trading missile for missile is the way you turn a conflict into a war. There seems to be no end in sight to the risk of escalation. We'll get an update and some analysis on Israel's two-front conflict and the Gaza negotiations that grind on. The grinding struggle continues for Ukraine 2.5 years into the invasion by Russia, which just launched one of its largest missile attacks on Ukraine on energy and water facilities. It's 71 days until Election Day here in America, 15 days until the first debate between Harris and Trump. Major Garrett will check in with us on that. Mosquitoes, always irritating, now more dangerous. Cities in Massachusetts and New York are spraying pesticides to address various mosquito-borne illnesses, including the deadly one that hospitalized, of all people, infectious disease doctor Anthony Fauci. Plus, we'll have updates on that luxury yacht sinking off the coast of Sicily. It's now a manslaughter investigation. COVID tests are free again, and the long layover for 2 U.S. astronauts. And finally, in Australia, if your boss calls you after hours, you don't have to step away from the Barbie to answer it. The Daily Report starts in a moment. Well, hello. Thank you for joining us. We begin our report with hope and fear in the Middle East. Hope for a ceasefire in Gaza and fear of a broad regional conflict. On Sunday, Israel launched a series of strikes against Hezbollah targets in southern Lebanon. The Israeli military said it became aware of the group's plans to launch a major attack and took preemptive action. The IDF claims it killed at least 6 fighters. Shortly after, Hezbollah did fire hundreds of rockets towards Israel. The group had been promising to avenge the death of one of its senior commanders killed in Lebanon's capital city late last month. At least one Israeli soldier died from falling shrapnel after Israel intercepted one of Hezbollah's rockets. The hostilities raised concerns of a wider war in the Middle East. By nightfall, both sides pulled back in a show of de-escalation. But it didn't last very long. The Israeli military resumed smaller-scale attacks against Lebanon on Monday, while Hezbollah says it used an exploding drone to hit military equipment in northern Israel. Long-term stability also hinges on the outcome of ceasefire talks between Israel and Hamas in Cairo, which are set to continue this week. CBS News foreign correspondent Imtiaz Tyab has the latest. Imtiaz?
Well, John, the intense cross-border strike and counter-strike really is the most intense fighting we've seen between Hezbollah and Israel in the nearly 11 months of the Gaza war. However, it does seem that the fighting between these two bitter rivals is largely contained, with the leaders of Israel and indeed Hezbollah saying that they are satisfied with the actions that they've carried out, with Hassan Nasrallah, the Hezbollah leader, saying that people can, and I'm quoting here, breathe. Whatever the case, this comes at a time when the violence in Gaza is only intensifying. In fact, over the past few days, just over the weekend, over 200 Palestinians were killed in a series of Israeli strikes, all at the time when negotiators were in the Egyptian capital, Cairo, trying to hammer out an agreement which would see a ceasefire and hostage release deal. Now, although there wasn't a major breakthrough in Cairo, we understand that what's being described as low-level talks are taking place. And tonight, we're hearing from a senior White House spokesman who has said that Israel and Hezbollah's massive cross-border strikes against each other did not impact the Gaza ceasefire, and hostage release negotiations underway in Cairo, saying progress is being made and that the talks remain constructive. John.
Imtiaz Tyab in Tel Aviv. Thank you. Seth Jones joins us now to discuss the situation. He's a senior vice president and director of the International Security Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Thank you so much for being with us. When we talk about escalation, what might that look like? I mean, are we talking about fighters crossing the border, more missiles, Iran weighing in? And how concerned are you about any of that escalation possibly happening?
Well, John, I am definitely concerned about additional escalation. It could happen in several ways. One is we could see more sustained both air and potentially ground operations by the Israelis in southern Lebanon and Israeli airstrikes in multiple locations, including in and around Beirut against Hezbollah targets. So in growing violence that brings in Lebanon. Also, this has the potential to escalate outside of just Lebanon. The Houthis in Yemen have indicated support for Hezbollah, as have some of the popular mobilization groups in Iraq and some of the Iranian-aligned groups in Syria. So a larger war could bring in Iranian proxies and partners in multiple other countries. I mean, that's kind of where we're sitting right now watching.
Mm-hmm. How much do you think the U.S., which has naval forces positioned to deter Iran, is in fact deterring Iran of taking action itself or encouraging Hezbollah to take more aggressive action?
Well, John, I think that the U.S. actions, including carrier strike groups in the region, have probably deterred a major Iranian response. And that may include a big Hezbollah response. Hezbollah has somewhere between, by our calculations, 120,000 to 175, even as many as 200,000 standoff weapons. Those are mostly rockets, missiles, and in some cases, guided missiles. The U.S. Carrier strike group in the region, I mean, the U.S. does bring a lot of firepower with that, cruise missiles, fighter aircraft. So in my view, that's probably deterred a big response, but not some of these smaller tit-for-tat reactions that we're seeing between Hezbollah and Israel.
And now, Seth, I want to ask you about these the ceasefire negotiations. They appear just totally stuck. Can you help people understand the nature of the irreconcilable differences that appear to be just, well, not able to be reconciled?
Yeah, John, there are at least three issues that are sticking points right now. One is Israel is demanding a military presence along Gaza's border with Egypt. That has basically been a non-starter for Hamas, and there's been a lot of Egyptian pushback. So again, Netanyahu has argued that Israeli troops need to continue to patrol an area of Gaza along the border with Egypt. This is to keep an eye on material that's coming into or out of Gaza. The second issue is Israel has established a buffer zone inside Gaza and wants to keep it. And there's been pushback, including from Hamas, for that because it's inside of Gaza. And then a third one is Israel wants to retain an option to return to fighting after the first phase of a ceasefire if it doesn't like what it sees. So those have all apparently been sticking points. The first one, the Israeli presence along Gaza's border with Egypt, probably appears to be one of the largest sticking points.
And the sticking point from Hamas's perspective is essentially if Israel is still in Gaza, it's to destroy and eradicate Hamas, and Hamas is not in favor of that.
Yes, and it's in Palestinian territory in Gaza. So it's also been a sticking point for Egypt and Qatar as well. So it's been a sticking point for a range of those both countries and in the case of Hamas groups.
Seth Jones with the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Thanks so much, Seth.
Thanks, John.
Special counsel Jack Smith filed an appeal on Monday in former President Trump's classified documents case, urging the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals to overturn Judge Eileen Cannon's dismissal of the documents case. Cannon had ruled that Smith was improperly appointed. Smith argues that his appointment was lawful under the Attorney General's authority to appoint special counsels, and invalidating his role would call into question the legitimacy of numerous other federal appointments made under similar authority. The 11th Circuit overturned Cannon at the start of the case, when she appointed a special master to review the classified documents. The court ruled that the judge had overstepped her authority and provided no justification for the special master, which was seen as delaying the trial. Now to the campaign trail. The conventions are done, but there are still many key dates to come. In about 2 weeks, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump debate each other for the first time. 8 days after that, Trump is scheduled to face a New York judge to hear his punishment for falsifying business records. 2 days later, early in-person voting begins in some states, including Minnesota. That's the home, as you all know, of Harris's running mate, Tim Walz, who, less than 2 weeks after that, will debate his opponent, J.D. Vance, on CBS. In between will be dozens of rallies, fundraising events, and campaign ad releases, all leading to Election Day on November 5th. CBS News Chief Washington Correspondent Major Garrett will be watching all of it, and he joins me now. Major, the Harris campaign put out more fundraising numbers. They're very proud of themselves. They've raised, they say, $540 million since launching, the most of any presidential campaign in that time span. Help us put that in perspective for us. And how does all that cash get used, and will it affect the race?
So, of course, it will affect the race, John. Every presidential campaign wants more money, and for a couple of reasons. Money is kind of a barometer of how much emotional support there is and how much practical support there is for your candidacy. People write small checks, and that allows you to fund your campaign. And it's important in this one regard. Campaign money directly sent to a presidential campaign buys television ads at the lowest available rate across the country. Super PACs don't get that favorable rate. They sometimes have to pay 4, 5, maybe 10 times that lowest rate that a presidential campaign can acquire with what is called, in campaign finance circles, hard money. So the more money you have in reserve as a presidential campaign, the better you're able to spread your message, at least through television. And right now, the Harris campaign has about a $60 million cash on hand advantage over former President Trump. Now, super PACs aligned with former President Trump have about a $110 million advantage over Harris-aligned super PACs. But they have to spend a lot more to get their ads on TV, which means they don't get the same bang for their buck. So all of this money matters. And, of course, all money held by a presidential campaign also funds something else, which is ground operations. And right now, the Harris-Walz campaign has volunteers pouring through the doors in all the battleground states. And to give those volunteers the wherewithal to do that ground game work, you need to have materiel, phones, phone banking, all the other instruments of that. And you buy that what? With campaign donations. So money matters.
That was great. Thank you, Major. All right, now we're going on to a second. Just had to admire that for a minute. So today, former President Trump laid a wreath at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier to mark the 3rd anniversary of the Abbey Gate bombing, which killed 13 service members during the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, a signature foreign policy disaster for the Biden administration. Trump highlights this. On the other hand, several of Trump's national security advisors and secretaries of defense have said he should not be reelected. So with those as two kind of sides of this, how do you think national security will play out in this campaign?
The Afghanistan withdrawal is something that former President Trump will revisit over and over again for all sorts of reasons, not only to honor those American service personnel who died in the service of our country, but to the chaotic withdrawal and all the guarantees made by President Biden before that withdrawal that it would not be chaotic, that nothing would go wrong or nothing would go wrong nearly as badly as it did. And that was, to use a phrase that President Biden uses with some frequency, an inflection point for his presidency. Because it was after that event, John, that support for President Biden among independents began to decline and decline perceptibly, and it has not rebounded since then. Kamala Harris now doesn't have to deal with that, but nevertheless, she is, according to former President Trump, included in that circle of leadership that made all the decisions leading up to that withdrawal and all the things that went wrong. So former President Trump wants to align Kamala Harris as directly as he once did President Biden with Afghanistan. But the problem for the Trump campaign, John, and this is an interesting dimension of this election, is it's not sticking as much as it did with President Biden. The burden for the Trump campaign is to make things that once stuck very hard and clearly to President Biden the same to Kamala Harris. That's the work yet to be done for the Trump campaign.
And one of the things he'll try and do, former President Trump, is bring that case during the debate. But there's been this foolishness about Donald Trump, I say that because former President Trump threatened to pull out of the debate, and I can't count how many times he's threatened to pull out of debates over the last 9 years. Why does he do this? Is it to get attention? Is it to work the refs? What's behind these antics?
The key question is, why is he doing it now? And the now part of this is what's most important, John, because former President Trump finds himself in an utterly unique position in this campaign. He is no longer driving the conversation. And importantly, Democrats are no longer triggered by things that former President Trump says that are outrageous or they find injurious rhetorically or otherwise, racist or misogynistic or whatever. Democrats don't react to it in ways that they did before. That was clearly evident at the Democratic National Convention. Democrats now either ignore the incendiary things that former President Trump says or treat them with some dimension of mockery. Therefore, former President Trump has to get involved in the conversation at a different level. He knows if he talks about his status in the debate, he will at least get some attention. You have to pay attention to whether or not he's going to show up at the debate. But you know and I know, in our guts and everything else that we're learning, he'll be there September 10th, and this is just a bit of attention grabbing in between.
Major Garrett in Washington. Thank you so much, Major.
Sure.
Lawmakers on the House task force looking into the attempted assassination of Donald Trump visited the site of the shooting in Butler, Pennsylvania, Monday. The task force, a bipartisan committee, is investigating the Secret Service's action on and before July 13th. One of its members says the goal is to get answers for the American people.
You don't have to be a Democrat or a Republican or an unaffiliated to say that there's no room for political violence in America. You know, we have debates. We're going to have tough debates, and we're in the midst of an election cycle right now, and all of us are going to have those tough debates. But in the United States of America, you do not get to attempt to assassinate our elected officials and our candidates. It's unacceptable. And we are standing here in a bipartisan way to send the message that we won't tolerate it.
Despite initial speculation after the mid-July attempt, no evidence suggests the shooting was politically motivated. The focus of the task force will largely be on figuring out who was in charge of making certain security decisions that affected the former president's safety that day. Last week, the Secret Service put 5 agents on leave as a result of its internal investigation. Russia is responding to Kyiv's incursion. The Kremlin launches one of the largest strikes against across Ukraine since the start of the war. We'll have an assessment of the battlefield. Plus, Telegram's Russian founder is arrested in France as part of an ongoing investigation into criminal activity on the popular messaging app. We'll have the details. You're streaming the Daily Report.
These are the stories
1, 2, 3, go!
Of we, the people.
We're trying to generate our own hope.
It's a huge deal.
I'm enabling them to feel valued.
Eye on America. Weeknights on the CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush.
What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I used sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
Go to the ends of the earth. Reach for the stars.
Yeah, I just took off. That kind of thing.
Oh, that's pretty good.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
America Decides is your place for fact-based, unbiased reporting.
At the White House, at the Capitol, on the campaign trail.
What do you say to those in your party?
Any cracks in the Republican Party?
Our reporters and our anchors travel the country talking to voters like you
about the issues that matter most.
Immigration is really a factor right now
that are going to be driving your decisions What would you say to those who say, look, that's just democracy at work?
Listening to you and bringing your voice into our coverage.
I want a strong, proud America.
Is democracy on the ballot in 2024? Let us help you decide.
America Decides. Stream our expanded one-hour program Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
Exclusively on CBS News 24/7, the streaming home of CBS News.
People with developmental disabilities were once sequestered by the hundreds of thousands in institutions.
Many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower.
Disability activists have since torn down barriers blocking them from living at home or in the community.
We conclude that Title II of the ADA requires states to provide community-based treatment for persons with mental disabilities.
But of the 16,000 people who remain in state-operated institutions, half are in 5 states, and Illinois is one of them.
I don't want to live in the institution. It makes me feel discriminated against.
Do you think there are people living in institutions in Illinois that don't need to be living there?
Yeah, because they're proving it as soon as they get out.
Russia launched hundreds of missiles and drones at Ukraine on Monday, killing at least 7 people. Ukrainian officials said the strikes damaged power and water supplies. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky called it one of the largest attacks on his country since the war started. Nick Beek from our partners at the BBC is in Ukraine with more details.
The first strikes came in the early hours, crudely curtailing a long weekend of Ukrainian Independence Day celebrations. This missile just missed a power station near the capital, Kyiv. The Ukrainian defenders shot down what they could. "I got it," this soldier exclaims. But 1 in 5 missiles did get through. Russia said it successfully targeted energy infrastructure. Olya's brother was killed on the Zaporizhia land he'd farmed all his life.
I was very scared because of the explosion. I was shaking, and then I saw him, and I couldn't recognize him.
Near the city of Dnipro, lives and livelihoods extinguished. President Zelensky argued that a collective effort had protected Israel from aerial attack and called on Western allies to do more to shoot down Russian missiles and drones.
It was one of the biggest combined strikes. More than 100 missiles of various types and about 100 Iranian drones. In various Ukrainian regions, we could have done more in order to protect life if aircraft of our European neighbours had worked together with our F-16 jets and air defence.
The missiles also hit this region, Sumy, which borders Russia. It was from here the Ukrainians launched their surprise incursion 3 weeks ago, going in and then seizing Russian territory. That undoubtedly gave Ukraine a big morale boost, but today has been a jolting nationwide reminder of what Russia is capable of.
And the Kremlin suggested more punishment for the recent incursion into Russian soil was still to come.
Such hostile actions cannot remain without an appropriate response. There will definitely be a response.
But Ukraine, under great pressure on the home front, is on the attack, sending its own drones into Russia, hitting the city of Saratov, and urging the West to allow it to strike further and harder. Nick Beek, BBC News, in the Sumy region, Ukraine.
Samuel Cherub joins me for more. He is a distinguished chair in Russia and Eurasia policy and a senior political scientist at RAND, a nonprofit global policy think tank and research institute. Sam, help us understand. Ukraine has been bracing for a major Russian attack in response to this offensive into Russian territory. Are we in a new stage in this conflict, and can you put it where we are in a kind of timeline for the 2.5 years that this war has been going on?
Sure. In some ways, there's been a huge amount of change in the last 3 weeks. We've seen a successful Ukrainian incursion into undisputed Russian territory where they're holding land for the first time since the start of the war, 2.5 years ago now. And, that was really unprecedented and quite surprising to many, even to officials in the U.S. government who apparently were not informed ahead of time. So in a way, a lot has changed, even in just the last couple of weeks. But on the other hand, fundamentally, the basics of this war have more or less been set in since the late spring of 2022. We have two militaries that are quite capable, that are sort of slugging it out in a contest that neither of them can really achieve a sort of absolute victory in. They cannot wipe out the other side. And so eventually this is going to be settled at the negotiating table at some point. I don't think the Kursk operation fundamentally changes that, just as I don't think that Russia's slow but steady advances in the Donbas region of eastern Ukraine or these rocket attacks on Ukrainian cities fundamentally alters that reality either. In a way, we're just talking about how the sides use their battlefield position to enhance their eventual bargaining position.
Is there a way in which that something specific would have to happen to get to a bargaining position, or is it just when they decide that they've gotten enough to get there, or is there kind of a going view about how they might get to the table?
It's a very good question. There are theories about how negotiations come about in a war, that both sides have to be in a sort of herding situation where they don't think they can gain more on the battlefield. But really, there's no science to it at the end of the day. And a lot of this is politics. We know of countries who've kept fighting even when they know they were going to lose, because the prospects of peace didn't seem any more appealing than losing the war. I don't think we're anywhere near getting to that table right now. But I think the important thing for viewers to keep in mind when looking at this, that all of these battles are quite tactically important. And it is sort of shocking to see, in a way, the success of the Ukrainian military on undisputed Russian territory. But we're not going to end this war in sort of classic absolute victory like the U.S. defeat of Nazi Germany or Imperial Japan. This is going to be something much less, complete and total. It's unlikely we're going to see a Ukrainian flag flying over the Kremlin or a Russian flag flying over in Kyiv. So, I think that that basic fact of the balance hasn't really shifted.
And finally, Sam, the U.S. election. Donald Trump claims he can, get this all settled quickly. Leaving that aside as an unserious claim, he does have he does not support the Ukrainians' mission as much as Kamala Harris and the Democrats do, at least rhetorically. How do you think the election will play into or not that set of conditions that you have outlined that would lead to a negotiated settlement?
Well, I mean, the key variable is U.S. support for the Ukrainian military. I mean, without the U.S. support for the Ukrainian military, they would be in a much, much more difficult position, and Russia, in turn, would be in a much more advantageous position. So if we're talking about the eventual terms of a settlement, it would lead to a much less favorable settlement for Ukraine if U.S. aid were to be just suspended. Now, I don't think we can predict with any degree of certainty about how one or the other candidate will act in the context of the post-election period. Obviously, a lot of things are said during a campaign that don't come to pass afterwards. But the key variable, of course, is what the new president that takes office at the end of January 2025 will do in terms of the military assistance. But no matter who wins, there will be a moment at that time, as there will be with other policy areas, to reconsider U.S. policy on this issue and potentially pivot towards some kind of negotiation. That doesn't mean necessarily that moment will be taken or that it will be taken in a particularly effective way, but at least provides a sort of, the first year of a new administration always provides an opportunity to review and reassess.
Samuel Chair with RAND, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Now to a digest of some other foreign stories. Officials in Pakistan say an armed separatist group killed at least 38 people Monday in a series of deadly attacks in the southwest. Pakistan's security forces say they killed 21 militants in response to the violence and plan to continue operations against the insurgent group in the coming days. Pakistani separatists have carried out attacks against both civilians and military while demanding independence from the government. The Taliban now mandates all Afghan women hide their face, body, and voice from the public when outside the home. The new requirements are part of the group's so-called vice and virtue laws, published 3 years after the Taliban seized control of Afghanistan in 2021. The head of the UN mission to Afghanistan said the laws offer a distressing vision of the country's future and that Afghan women already face intolerable conditions. President Biden's National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan is en route to China. The White House says he will meet with the Chinese foreign minister in Beijing. The two are expected to discuss Taiwan, military relations, and the spread of fentanyl. This will be the first visit to China by a White House National Security Advisor since Susan Rice during the Obama administration in 2016. Multiple viruses are spreading across the United States through mosquitoes. We'll hear from CBS News contributor Dr. Celine Gounder about the risks, the symptoms, and how to protect yourself. You're streaming The Daily Report.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
Nate has one of the quickest minds I've ever seen.
Tony has a way of making people feel comfortable.
Gail has this unbelievable knack to ask the question that you're asking at home.
I've been told I could talk to a tree, and that's pretty much true.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
It didn't seem like anything could happen, because nothing ever happens in East Palestine, but it did.
Authorities released toxic fumes from 5 derailed train cars.
Resident, please evacuate.
Acute bronchitis due to chemical fumes. Did you ever have these problems before the derailment? No, ma'am.
This neighborhood's not safe no more.
We can assure the community that there's not vinyl chloride entering their communities.
Then why are there so many people feeling these various symptoms of bloody noses or difficulty breathing, bronchitis?
That's a hard question to answer.
We're talking about one of the most blatant releases of a mixture of some of the most toxic chemicals that we've seen in America.
I feel like now I have a duty to warn other communities. If my daughter has to watch me die of cancer, at least it saves someone else. This case.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
But it's not fiction. It's 48 hours.
Human remains found this week.
4 families shattered.
There's no physical evidence.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Like a John Grisham novel.
A gripping true crime original. 48 hours. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform.
You can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Dragon capsule here in space.
Sightseers in space, the thrill of a lifetime.
Seeing the Earth from space, it was so exhilarating.
But the risks that come with the territory.
There have been 4 fatal accidents. That's a 1% fatal accident rate.
Might make you look before you launch.
If you had 1 out of 100 airplanes falling out of the sky, we'd have a public crisis.
Space tourism, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to the Daily Report. I'm John Dickerson. Here are some additions to our top stories. The UN is suspending aid operations in Gaza in the wake of new Israeli evacuation orders targeting an area where its operations center was located. The UN official told Reuters the staff had to move so quickly that equipment was left behind. Palestinian officials say some patients fled a nearby hospital out of fear. The European Union Red Sea naval mission says a crude oil tanker has been on fire for 3 days after a Houthi attack. The Greek-flagged ship is carrying more than 165,000 tons of oil, but there have not yet been any signs of a spill. Houthi rebels have been attacking ships in the area to protest the Israel-Hamas war. Former President Trump is suggesting he could pull out of the debate next month with Vice President Kamala Harris. Still, they both have appeared to agree on a key detail: no muting a candidate's microphone while the other candidate is speaking. It's a departure from June's debate between Trump and President Biden when the non-speaking person was cut off. Dr. Anthony Fauci, the man who helped guide the United States through the COVID-19 pandemic, is recovering from a different serious illness, West Nile virus. Fauci told CBS News he was hospitalized about 2 weeks ago. He returned home late last week. The 83-year-old said he likely contracted the virus after being bitten by a mosquito in his backyard. Fauci is expected to make a full recovery. So what is West Nile virus? The CDC says it's the most common mosquito-borne disease in the United States. So far this year, there have been more than 200 cases reported across 31 states. There are no vaccines to prevent it, nor medicines to treat it. CBS News medical contributor Dr. Celine Gounder joins us now for more. She's also the editor-at-large for public health at KFF. So if Dr. Anthony Fauci can get it, how concerned should people be that they might get this virus?
Well, this is, in fact, the most common mosquito-borne disease here in the United States. Many cases go under the radar because they're asymptomatic. So remember, with COVID, we talked about asymptomatic. Not everybody develops symptoms. The vast majority of these cases are asymptomatic. The people who are more likely to develop symptoms are older people, including somebody like Dr. Tony Fauci, people who are immunocompromised, and pregnant women are also at risk because, remember, pregnancy is a period of immunocompromise. It's how you are able to carry the baby without your immune system rejecting it.
So if you are symptomatic, what should you look for and how bad can it get?
So you can get flu-like symptoms, so fever, headache, muscle pains, feeling just sort of flu-y and fatigued. More severe symptoms that really would be concerning is if you do develop a rash, stiff neck. The headache, especially if it's not getting better, can be a sign of meningitis or encephalitis. And so those would be reasons, red flags, to be going in to see a healthcare provider.
Let me also ask you about Eastern equine encephalitis. What is that? And they're spraying for that, right? So tell us what that is, and then we'll find out what they're doing about it.
So this is a very rare, fortunately very rare, mosquito-borne infection. The last time I saw a case was about 20 years ago in Massachusetts. But it is a horrible infection. When people do develop symptoms from what we call triple E, Eastern equine encephalitis, very few of them get away without any long-term complications. They may have seizures in the long term, cognitive issues, and there's a pretty high mortality rate from triple E as well.
And is the encephalitis that affects the brain? Is that right?
That affects the brain. So both West Nile and triple E can cause brain infections, which is when you get very severe manifestations of the disease.
And because it's so serious, that's why they're spraying for it, not because it's so prevalent, but because it's so serious.
Because it is so serious. We are seeing, big picture, a rise in mosquito-borne diseases across the United States, and this is being driven by climate change, wetter climates, humidity, and we're seeing an increase in the range of mosquitoes as a result. So it's not just West Nile and triple E that they're spraying for. There are other infections like dengue, for example, in Florida and Puerto Rico that we're seeing across the country.
What can those of us who are in the backyard do to protect from this, other than just staying inside? My preference.
Well, look, we all have to go about our daily lives, and we should be able to spend some time outdoors, particularly when the weather is nice. But if you have standing water in your backyard, you want to drain that if you can, if at all possible, because that's where mosquitoes breed. Some of the other measures you can take to reduce your risk would include wearing long sleeves, long pants to guard against bites, using mosquito repellents. And then, of course, your health department is there to inspect areas where they think there might be mosquitoes breeding, and they can help address that as well.
Dr. Celine Gowner, thank you so much, as always. As cases of COVID-19 spike this summer, you will soon be able to order free test kits again in the mail. The Biden administration is restarting the at-home test program. Beginning sometime in late September, Americans will be able to order up to 4 nasal swabs. Officials also recommend people get updated booster shots. Recent CDC data shows infections are growing or likely growing in more than half the country. Health experts point to a few factors behind the uptick, including waning immunity, some might say, and people spending time indoors to escape the heat and the mosquitoes. Italian prosecutors have opened a manslaughter investigation in the wake of that luxury yacht that sunk during a storm last week. There are no suspects named in the case right now. Investigators want to learn why the $40 million vessel, which its maker called unsinkable, capsized so quickly, while other boats were mostly unharmed. Officials said the yacht was hit by a tornado over water. 7 people were killed. Among the victims were British tech tycoon Michael Lynch, who was celebrating after being acquitted recently on U.S. fraud charges. And he was also killed was his 18-year-old daughter. French President Emmanuel Macron said Monday Telegram founder and CEO Pavel Durov was arrested in France Saturday, and it's not for political reasons. French authorities say the Russian-born billionaire has been accused of failing to moderate criminal activity, including organized crime, child pornography, and narcotics distribution on the popular messaging app Telegram, which is similar to WhatsApp. It's known for being uncensored and tends to attract political extremists. It's also popular among pro-democracy activists in places like Hong Kong and Ukraine. 2 years ago, grocery giants Kroger and Albertsons announced plans to create the largest supermarket merger in United States history. But it's not a supermarket sweep just yet, as the issue went to court on Monday. The Federal Trade Commission is suing to block the nearly $25 billion deal. Antitrust regulators argue it would eliminate competition, raise grocery prices, and hurt unionized workers. But Kroger and Albertsons say a merger will help them compete against bigger chains like Walmart. That store controls 22% of American grocery sales. Combined, Kroger and Albertsons would control 13%. The court hearing over the deal is expected to last until mid-September. Still to come, NASA makes a difficult decision to leave 2 astronauts in space for several more months as another crewed mission prepares to take flight. And SpaceX will have its hands on both of them. You're streaming The Daily Report.
Washington is the seat of power. National security, foreign policy, global economics, every story comes through Washington in some way. We bring some of the most powerful voices in America to the table. We don't just ask the questions, you have to go deeper. We try to understand what's at the heart of the issue we're talking about, to then come forward with solutions.
Face the Nation on CBS.
The justices ruled that Harvard and the University of North Carolina violated the Constitution.
In the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision to end affirmative action in college admissions, uncertainty sets in for some students of color.
Affirmative action really gave us an equal opportunity.
CBS Reports explores the historic decision and what it means for those chasing an opportunity to change their lives.
I knew that college was the ticket to break this cycle.
The end of affirmative action, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
America Decides is your place for fact-based, unbiased reporting.
At the White House, at the Capitol, on the campaign trail.
What do you say to those in your party?
Any cracks in the Republican Party?
Our reporters and our anchors travel the country talking to voters like you
about the issues that matter most.
Immigration is really a factor right now
that are going to be driving your decisions
What would you say to those who say, look, that's just democracy at work?
Listening to you and bringing your voice into our coverage.
I want a strong, proud America.
Is democracy on the ballot in 2024? Let us help you decide.
America Decides on CBS News 24/7.
Stream our expanded one-hour program Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
AI is among the most world-changing technologies ever.
Curing diseases, scientific breakthroughs, making lives better.
They can help us with medical discoveries, scientific discoveries, doing better agriculture, having cures for things like Alzheimer's.
It's also going to really transform the way we work.
The uplifting potential of artificial intelligence is limitless.
It gives you a friend, somebody to chat with 24/7 that is non-judgmental. He makes me feel loved and desired.
And so are its downfalls.
The problem with all this AI is that it's unpredictable and uncontrollable.
The choices we make now will have lasting effects for decades, maybe even centuries.
The ChatGPT revolution, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
We are about to see American weapons in the hands of Mexican cartels.
A gun pipeline to Mexico.
We are arming the cartels.
100%, no doubt about it.
Happening right under our noses.
Who's doing something about this? Nobody.
A CBS Reports exclusive.
Most Americans have no idea that we are effectively arming the enemy next door.
This is the story the American people need to know.
Arming cartels, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
NASA had a decision to make over the weekend. Send Commander Butch Williams and co-pilot Sonny Williams to home to Earth on Boeing's Starliner capsule, which had been marred by issues, or keep them on the ISS until February, when they could hitch a ride with SpaceX. It chose the latter. Wilmore and Williams lifted off on June 5th for the Starliner's first piloted test flight. They were expected to return about a week later, but helium leaks and equipment issues raised safety concerns and prompted NASA to delay the astronauts' return and keep them aboard the International Space Station. The situation is putting pressure on another crewed mission, dubbed Polaris Dawn. It's set to launch early Tuesday morning after being delayed by a day. The SpaceX venture will include 4 private citizens. It's the first of 3 commercial missions, partially funded by billionaire Jared Isaacman, who is also going to be on board as the flight commander. For more on this, let's bring in CBS News space consultant Bill Harwood. Bill, when I spoke to Butch Wilmore and Sonny Williams back in May, before they embarked on this journey, they said they were ready for any issues that could arise, but I don't think that included 9 months in space. So how are they doing, and what are they going to spend this next several more months? What are they doing with all this time, essentially?
Well, hey, John, good to see you again. First of all, astronauts, they are professionals. Wilmore and Williams are both veteran military test pilots. And every time an astronaut takes off to the station, they always know there's a chance that something could happen that would make them either extend their mission or cut it short. In this case, obviously, it's quite an extension. They basically have become part of the space station crew. We hear them on air-to-ground audio from the space station on a daily basis. They're doing experiments. They're helping out with maintenance. I mean, they're busy just as much as every other space station crew member. And, of course, during the rest of their stay up there, the 6 months that's being added to it, they'll become full-time members of the next expedition. So from NASA's perspective and the station's perspective, they'll be busy the whole time. From their perspective, will they spend any time wondering how things are going on at home and things like that? Well, of course.
Yeah. And Wilmore and Williams will return to Earth in 2025 on a capsule built by Boeing's competitor, SpaceX. What was behind that decision, and how's NASA's relationship with Boeing these days?
It's really interesting. For their part, the Boeing engineers think the capsule is totally safe, would easily bring the crew back home in safety as needed. NASA looked at all the same test data, but they decided, we just don't have enough certainty that those systems that you mentioned, the helium leaks, the thruster problems they've had, there's no certainty. You can't prove that those problems won't get worse after the ship undocks. And of course, they've got to be able to fire their engines and get out of orbit to come home. So NASA decided to play it safe. I don't think that's terribly surprising given the experience of the Shuttle Columbia disaster back in 2003, you know, when they had a known problem and didn't address it with obviously tragic results. So I think from NASA's perspective, they didn't have any choice at all. The relationship with Boeing, it's hard to say. NASA is counting on Boeing to perfect this spacecraft. They want to have 2 spacecraft, you know, to go along with SpaceX to carry astronauts up and down to the station, just in case a major problem comes along that might ground one of the companies for a long period of time. If you only have one provider and they go down for a while, then you've got no way to send people up or down to the space station. So NASA's counting on Boeing to keep this going. Boeing says they will, but, you know, that's all TBD. They got to get the spacecraft back, see what it's going to take to get it, you know, up to snuff, and how much that's going to cost.
Yes, indeed. The dollar signs as well. Before I let you go, 4 private citizens are scheduled to lift off just before 4 a.m. For a spacewalk in partnership with SpaceX. What more can you tell us about this mission? And are there any safety concerns given that's what's going on with those astronauts on the ISS?
No, I don't think so. And, you know, all space flight is risky by definition. This one's a little more risky than most of these commercial flights because, as you say, it's the first flight to feature spacewalks by non-government, purely civilian individuals and private companies. You know, I think it's going to be really interesting. They're not only going to be carrying out this first commercial spacewalk, the Crew Dragon spacecraft itself is going to be going higher than any spacecraft since the Apollo program. They'll set a new Earth orbit altitude record in the process of all of this. And so it's pretty dramatic stuff for SpaceX. It's definitely an impressive mission and does definitely carry a bit more risk than usual.
Bill Harwood in Merritt Island, Florida. Thank you. A pleasure as always, Bill.
Thank you.
It is now legal in Australia to ignore work-related messages and calls after work hours. It's called the Right to Disconnect Law. We'll show you how it could benefit both employees and their employers. You're streaming The Daily Report.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now.
We got something crazy.
And reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking.
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
Innovative and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
At this moment, terrorists could be plotting another attack.
9/11 triggered a counter-terrorist system that included a secret database.
This person needs a closer look.
A growing list of nearly 2 million people, including some Americans who say they're innocent.
For a 1-hour flight, I have to spend 6 hours to go and come back.
CBS Reports explores the system, the people responsible for it, and those pushing for change.
I'm not fighting against them. I'm fighting for them to do the right thing.
The Watch List, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Don't miss true crime anytime you want, anywhere you go. With the 48 Hours podcast. Real crimes, real lives, real justice.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Listen to 48 Hours on Apple Podcasts.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Imagine yourself in Manhattan with no police, no army, no mayor.
The people of Haiti stare down poverty, corruption, natural disasters, and violence.
90% of the guns that are used by gangs in Haiti are American guns.
But with an unbreakable spirit and eternal optimism.
There are days where I cry, but we can't be discouraged. We still believe in Haiti.
They're still able to look ahead with hope.
Haiti is on the brink of transformation, a radical shift. Nations are coming together and saying things must change.
Fighting for Haiti, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Hey there, welcome to The Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's going to be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today.
I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm going to remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was going to be born, he was only going to live for 30 minutes. It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift, stream now on the free CBS News app.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
A CBS News investigation. People looking for love, finding their life savings gone.
This could happen to anybody.
And sometimes losing their lives. Anything for love. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
See if you can follow this one. Boston Red Sox catcher Danny Jansen is now the first person in Major League Baseball history to play for two teams in one game. How did that happen? Let me try to explain. On June 26, Jansen was at the plate for the Toronto Blue Jays when severe weather suspended the game. That game was against Boston. 2 months later, that game resumed on Monday. But thanks to a trade in July, Jansen now plays for the Red Sox. And because Boston needed someone to take the spot behind the plate after the previous catcher, Boston catcher it is, was removed, it had Jansen step up to create this historic moment. Playing first for the Blue Jays, then traded, then playing 2 months later for the Boston Red Sox. In the actual game, the one that was played to a conclusion, Jansen's old team came out on top. The Blue Jays beat the Red Sox 4-1. Sometimes you need to let your stress out, and Nigerians in Lagos are doing just that in the country's very first Rage Room. For about $5, patrons are given protective gear and armed with a sledgehammer or bat to physically release frustrations on recycled electronics for 30 minutes. And Nigerians have a lot of stress lately, specifically over the economy. Inflation is at a record high, and the country's currency has hit a new low. 40% of its citizens also live below $2 per day, and mental health services are largely inaccessible. Australia is taking a different approach to helping people de-stress. The country has enacted a new law that gives employees the right to disconnect. That means people can now ignore their bosses and colleagues outside of the scheduled working hours without punishment. Employers can be fined up to $64,000 for violating the law. The Australian Council of Trade Unions says it's an effort to create a stronger work-life balance. Workplace experts say this rule could ultimately result in more efficiency because employees would be less likely to take time off or leave their jobs. More than 20 other countries, mainly in Europe and Latin America, have similar laws. Here's a look at some of the stories we're covering in our next hour. Vice President Harris and former President Trump are making preparations for the debate stage while keeping a full calendar of appearances. Plus, Russia launches a massive strike on Ukraine as Ukraine continues to claim new ground in Russia. We'll discuss how the dynamic of the war has changed and what comes next. You're streaming CBS News.
Okay, so let's just start at the beginning.
Well, let me start with this. What is at stake here?
What is the answer then?
Do you know why?
You want me to just keep going?
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Were there death threats?
How is this possible?
What's wrong with that argument?
Are you saying they lied?
Have you told the government that?
Why won't you say the word crisis?
You're not answering my question.
Is that scary?
Does that make sense?
What do you mean?
What does that mean in
Did any of that make sense?
What's your response?
What happened?
Why?
It's time for the CBS News Original 60 Minutes, Sunday on CBS and streaming on Paramount+.
There is no more room in our city.
New York City is receiving record numbers of migrants.
Today, we're going to have more than 500 adults and children come through that door.
Tensions rise as shelters reach max capacity.
We don't have to take care of them.
CBS Reports goes inside a crisis cities and families are facing as they fight to survive.
The United States still has that glimmer of hope for people to come here.
Fighting for a future. Now streaming on the free CBS News app. An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Since you started La Soup in 2014, do you have any sense as to how much food you've rescued from the landfill?
We've rescued 4.5 million pounds.
I can't even fathom how much food that is.
And that's one little person in one little city in America. We're going to call this chicken piccata. We did 450 of these meals today.
This is the exact dish that you and I are going to have.
Yep.
Oh, my God.
Is it good?
Mm-hmm.
Having a plan of how to keep people fed should be in every single city.
So if we eliminated food waste, could we eliminate
hunger? Yes.
Eating Trash, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
America Decides is your place for fact-based, unbiased reporting.
At the White House, at the Capitol, on the campaign trail. What do you say to those in your party?
Any cracks in the Republican Party?
Our reporters and our anchors travel the country talking to voters like you
about the issues that matter most.
Immigration is really a factor right now
that are going to be driving your decisions.
What would you say to those who say, look, that's just democracy at work?
Listening to you and bringing your voice into our coverage.
I want a strong, proud America.
Is democracy on the ballot in 2024?
Let us help you decide.
America Decides on CBS News 24/7.
Stream our expanded one-hour program Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
When people say who's first to get in the morning, that would be me. Morning news matters because it sets the tone for your day, and it's a way of getting you started.
Day to day, that first draft of history, it happens right here.
We're going to uplift you. We're going to send you out your way.
We take you places, we teach you new things, and we make you feel like, you know, it's not all bad.
People say to me, you always seem to be having a good time. And you know what? You're right.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
I'm John Dickerson. Join me for the Daily Report, weekdays on CBS News 24/7.
Okay, let's go. You guys good?
Hey.
All right, we good?
Keep going.
The clock, it's ticking.
Off we go.
60 minutes. 60 minutes.
60 minutes.
It's time for 60 Minutes, Sundays on CBS.
Welcome to the Daily Report for August 26, 2024. I'm John Dickerson. Inflammation over the weekend in the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah appears to have cooled. But trading missile for missile is the way you turn a conflict into a war. There seems to be no end in sight to the risk of escalation. We'll get an update and some analysis on Israel's two-front conflict and the Gaza negotiations that grind on. The grinding struggle continues for Ukraine 2.5 years into the invasion by Russia, which just launched one of its largest missile attacks on Ukraine on energy